Hi everyone, Chris here, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about the books I read between February 23rd and March 1st. First up is A Wolf for a Spell by Kara Sutton, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. In this book we have 3 points of view. The first is Zima, a wolf who just wants to protect her pack. The second is Nadia, an orphan who is just looking for a place to belong. And the third is Baba Yaga, who is looking for a way to try to rectify a past mistake. In order for Baba Yaga to fix her mistake, she must switch places with Zima. At first, Zima isn't interested in doing this because she has been brought up to believe that Baba Yaga is someone to be feared. But when her pack is in danger, she makes the trade with Baba Yaga as long as Baba Yaga does something to protect her pack in return. Yaga and her end up switching bodies, and while Yaga is out in the woods in Zima's body, Zima and Baba Yaga's body is confronted by Nadia. Nadia has come to secure Baba Yaga's help, and when Zima finds out that they have a common enemy, she agrees to help even though she has no idea what she's doing. I really enjoyed this book. I like that it was told in 3 points of view and that they were all very, very different, because you had Nadia, who's just a human girl, and Zima, who is a wolf in a magical body, and then Baba Yaga, who is a magical human being who is now in a wolf's body. I really enjoyed getting to see the dynamic between the three and how their stories kind of intertwined. It was also interesting getting to see Zima try to figure out how to help the situation and again protect her pack while also being in a human body and having magic and having no idea how to utilize all of that. I also really liked the inclusion of Baba Yaga and her house with chicken legs, as the house with chicken legs is also its own kind of character. I really enjoyed this book and how the stories kind of came together, and I definitely want to check out more by Kara Sutton in the future. Next up, I read Premeditated Myrtle by Elizabeth C. Bunce, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. In this book, we follow Myrtle, who is into criminal justice. She adores learning about crime scene analysis. When her neighbor dies under what Myrtle considers suspicious circumstances, she decides she's going to get to the bottom of what happened. So this is a historical fiction mystery, so it is set in the past, and I think that makes things interesting for Myrtle, because obviously a young girl being interested in criminal justice and crime scene analysis and murder is not the type of thing that is encouraged by society at that time. And yet, to some extent, her father and I want to say her governess, I think that's what she's called, both encourage Myrtle to use her strong mind, though in different ways. It is quite interesting to see Myrtle kind of piece together what happened to her neighbor and how she goes about sussing out clues. There is also a cat character in this book, and as somebody who loves cats, I love when there are cats in books, and this cat is quite the character and definitely adds to the story. I will definitely be reading more of Myrtle's journeys and seeing what other crimes she manages to solve. Next up, I read Anna on the Edge by A.J. Sass, and I gave this book 5 stars. In this book, we follow 12-year-old Anna, who is a figure skating champion. She loves figure skating and is looking forward to the next season. However, when she finds out that the next season is princess themed, she starts to feel uncomfortable and isn't sure why. She then meets a boy named Hayden at the rink and finds out he's transgender, and it starts to make her think. When Hayden mistakes her for a boy, she just goes along with it. This leads her to start questioning her own gender identity, while also trying to juggle her new friendship, her old friendships, her skating career, and her family life. So as somebody who is gender fluid, I identified a lot with Anna and her journey throughout this book. I like that it started with her kind of feeling uncomfortable and not being sure why, and then getting introduced to Hayden and realizing that Hayden was not born a boy and had the ability to say, but I am a boy, and that he had changed his pronouns, and that kind of opened her eyes to the fact that this was something that happened, because before that she'd had no idea that this was a possibility. I thought it was really neat seeing her kind of work through her feelings about what that brought up in her life, all while also moving up a level in skating and having to work with different people and not quite knowing how to say that she felt uncomfortable. Partly because she didn't know how, and partly because she wasn't sure why. I really like getting to see Anna's friendships throughout this book and how they develop and play into what she's going through. And I also like how the book ended and the place where we left Anna at the end of the book, because I felt that that was super realistic. All in all, this was just a really awesome book, and I will never get over reading characters in books that I can identify, and I really wish I had had access to books like this when I was a middle grader, because I think I would have figured out things a lot sooner if I had. Next up, I read Homegoing by Ya Gyasi, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. This is a multi-generational book that spans like 300 years. It starts off with half-sisters, Effia and Essie, and follows their family lines. Effia is married off to a white general, while Essie is put on a ship and transported to America as a slave. We then, like I said, follow their descendants and see their journey. My biggest gripe about this book is that I would just be getting into a character story and it would kind of wrap up and we would move on to the next one. And I wish we had gotten to spend more time with each of the characters. I think that was my biggest problem with this book, is that I would start to get attached and want to know more about the characters, and we would have to ship generations, and we wouldn't get to find out more about their story until we were reading about their kids, and that wasn't always satisfying. I did enjoy getting to read each of their stories, though. Like I said, I wish there had been more. Like, I would have been totally okay with this being an even longer book, not to add more generations in, but just to get to spend more time with each generation. I thought it was a fascinating look at how these two girls kind of came from the same place, and how, due to circumstances, their lives differed, and how that made things so different for each of their descendants. I really like the running narrative through the entire story that kind of tied things up in the end. But at the end of the day, my biggest problem was that I didn't get to spend enough time with the characters, especially once I was starting to get attached to them. I wanted more from them. However, I did really like Ya Gyasi's writing, so I can definitely see myself picking up more from her in the future. Next up, I read Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, and I gave this book 4 stars. In this book, we follow Frances, who is super focused on school and will let nothing get in her way. Not even who she really is. One day she meets Aled, and he ends up bringing her out of her shell. He gets her to focus on things that aren't just school. This leads Frances to be torn between who she is and who the world believes her to be. I really enjoyed this book, as I loved getting to see Frances and Aled's friendship and the fact that it was just a friendship. A lot of times in young adult books, we see a boy and a girl become friends and it turns to romance, and I like that in this one. That was not at all the focus. It really was just a focus on Frances and Aled and their friendship. I also like that one of the ways that Frances expresses herself, her real self, is by doing fan art for her favorite podcast, Radio Silence, and how her and Aled bond over Radio Silence. The main things I enjoyed about this were the fact that Frances and Aled's friendship was just that, a friendship, and getting to see Frances figure out the things that are really important to her and having to decide whether it is worth sacrificing everything she is just to achieve the things in school that she wants to achieve. That maybe there is more to life than just good grades and getting into a good university. Next up, I read Solitaire by Alice Oseman, and I gave this book 2.5 stars. In this book, we follow teenager Tori, who is dealing with a lot of stuff. From A-levels to applying to universities and dealing with her brother Charlie, who had some issues in the recent past. Then a blog pops up called Solitaire, and it starts committing pranks, some of which are tame and some of which are dangerous. This leads Tori to making a new friend named Michael. When Michael starts looking into who is behind Solitaire, Tori gets roped into the search. So this is part of the Heartstopper universe. Tori is Charlie's older sister, and in Heartstopper, Nick and Charlie are the main characters of that graphic novel series. And I love that graphic novel series. I kind of wish I hadn't read this when I did, because I'm still reading Nick and Charlie's story, and this definitely has some spoilers because we get to learn about Charlie and his life and things that we haven't learned in Heartstopper. My biggest problem with this is that I didn't enjoy Tori at all. I didn't like being in her head. I not like the way she thought. I just really struggled getting through this book, as I had a hard time caring about Tori, and it definitely kind of ruined this novel for me. And again, like I said, I was not happy that I didn't realize until I got into it that Tori was Charlie's older brother, and I was learning things about Charlie that I didn't want to know yet. All in all, this novel just wasn't for me, but I still plan to read stuff by Alice Oseman, as I'm totally invested in the Heartstopper universe, and I've liked all of the other books I've read by her. And lastly, I read Face Blind by Lance Havermill, and I gave this book 2.75 stars. So in this book, we follow Gabe, who has a condition where he cannot distinguish people's faces. One night, he sees a murder, and of course, when he's interviewed by the police, he can't describe the murder at all, because to him, the murderer looks exactly the same to him as the policeman did. As the investigation progresses, he becomes a suspect and has to figure out a way to prove that he is not the killer and find the killer, despite the fact that he has no idea what the killer looks like. So the premise of this book is absolutely fascinating. I love the idea of having a character who sees a murder, but because of a medical condition, cannot describe the murderer in the slightest. Gabe explains in the book that he can't distinguish anything about faces. Old, young, black or white, male, female, none of that can he tell just by looking at somebody's face. And I think that makes things so fascinating. However, I was not into his story. This story was a bit gory for me. It had a little too much explanation about the murder, and I did not enjoy that. And if I had known going into it that it was going to be that graphic, I would have never picked the book up. There was also a subplot where we had a set of twins, and one of them has Down syndrome, and he has a hard time reading except for this one author's book. He can read that book front to back. He might struggle to read a picture book, but he can read this adult sci-fi novel just fine. And his sister brings him to meet the author of this book because she wants to get to the bottom of why her brother can read this book. And they end up crossing paths with Gabe. And I thought that was far more fascinating than what was going on with Gabe. Like, why can her brother read this book when he can't read anything else? I have no idea whether the depiction of Down syndrome and this character was accurate, as I don't know much about Down syndrome, and looking through the reviews on Goodreads, I couldn't find any Own Voices reviews or anybody who has somebody in their life who has Down syndrome who has a better understanding of how Down syndrome works. So I have no idea whether that was accurate, but this book didn't really work for me because like I said, that I thought some of it was interesting and the premise sounded great, but for me, the execution just didn't work. So these are some of the books I've read recently. Have you read any of these books? If so, feel free to talk to me about them in the comments below. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me a Ferris wheel emoji, like this video, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye!